Recently, I did a review of the latest NF song Hope, and that review garnered quite a response from NF's fans, as expected. Now, incoherent rants and threats aside, there was one common theme that I wanted to take a closer look at. My biggest complaint about NF's new song was it was too much of the same. Now, it seemed that there was a good amount of comments that took issue with me singling NF out, and basically stating the claim that NF is no more guilty of this than any other artist. Why not find out? I decided I would take an artist that I enjoy, who is the most guilty of what I accused NF of being. I went through a couple of different choices, but landed on Blink 182, one of my favorite groups of all time, but not a group that I would ever start defending as musical prodigies. Now, how to test the levels of guilt that NF is of being basic versus Blink 182 was another thing. I have a passion for objective correctness, even when it comes to subjective opinions, and there are opinions that are more superior than other opinions based on the amount of objective reasoning and fact that led to the conclusion of why that opinion is held. Not all opinions are created equally, and if anyone told you that, they're a liar. So why did I give you that background? Well, because in creating a test for this, my motive is the most correct opinion. And if that would mean that my old opinion is less objectively correct, I have a much higher passion for current rightness than past rightness. My past self can suck it. If I could prove my past self wrong, I'll do it. So in creating this test, I wanted to find a way that I could frame Blink 182 and NF equally poorly and try as hard as I could to make Blink 182 as guilty of what I accused NF of, which would make my criticism of NF not fully fair. So I knew one thing I needed to do was take myself out of it a bit. I went to Spotify and I looked at the playlist for NF and Blink 182, the This Is playlist that Spotify makes themselves. I took the top 10 songs from each artist and I clicked random intervals of each song, basically around the 33%, 50%, 75% marks of the song, so I'd be capturing the climaxes of those songs at random and recorded 10 seconds of each of those songs, 10 seconds of each of the 10 songs from each artist. The next thing I did was stitched all of those together, with the goal being making these 10 songs as cohesive sounding as possible to make these songs sound more similar. So let's go ahead and listen to what I came up with for Blink 182.
No way, no, I leave the broken hearted. Say it ain't so, I will not go. Let's make this last forever. Once again, I'll turn to a friend. Friends say I should have my age. What's my age again? What's my age again? Beg you to come down, you can only leave. I'm here for solo. I fell in love with a girl at the rock show. I couldn't wait till I got home. Place your hand in mine. Where are you? And I'm so sorry.
So that's Blink 182. Now, before we get into NF, there's a couple surprises I found. The biggest surprise was that it took me a lot longer to figure out Blink 182's than it did NF. And I'll get into the reasons for that in a minute. Let's listen to NF's first, which, mind you, took me a lot less time to make one cohesive track. Take a listen, and then we'll talk about all the musical nerd jargon as to why it was so much easier for me to do this with NF than Blink 182.
What's my definition of success? 100-fold. It's probable that I might press the envelope. OCD trying to push my buttons. I said don't touch it. Now y'all done it. Leave it to the fam in the world. I just wanna sign a record deal. During my downtime, they come to my fortress. I apologize for all my pockets. Wait, come crashing over me, but I just watch them. Guess I'ma have to leave. Please don't come after me. I just wanna be alone right now. Just in case my car goes off the highway. Give some away. You gon' have to give. If you want love like that.
That last one I was pretty proud of, way too smooth. Let me break down for you why NF was so much more similar than Blink 182, and the reason why, if you thought Blink 182 sounded more similar than NF, the reason why you think that. So it comes down to the structure of these songs. Blink 182 was harder for me to mesh together as one consistent song for a few reasons. One is the cadence of the singing, two are the key signatures and BPM of the songs, and three are the engineering and recording styles of the songs. So let's start with the cadence of the singing. Blink 182 has two lead singers. In addition to this, they have a lot of different ways over the years that they've sang their choruses and verses. So this means one song could go from a grimy "turn to a friend" into more of a smooth "where are you?" and "I'm so that's both the differences between Tom's voice and Mark's voice, but also the ways they've chosen to sing their songs over time. Whereas with the cadence of Nate, you have basically two. You have soft-spoken Nate and you have aggressive Nate. And I guess in this, there was also one other Nate, the song that sounded a lot like 21 Pilots.
Just just in case my car goes off the highway.
And so it was a lot easier to just take all of the soft songs, put them next to each other, the aggressive songs, put them next to each other, and I think I used the 21 Pilot song as my transition piece. But Blink-182 is more all over the place with cadence. So that was the first thing that made Blink-182 more difficult and more unique in this challenge, is variable and vocal cadence. 2, key signature and BPM. Now both Blink-182 and NF are pretty guilty of having most of their songs in familiar keys. A key is like the scale that something is in. If you know piano, like C major, D major, etc. It can vary throughout a song, but usually a song will have a specific key that it's in. And the BPM is the beats per minute. How fast is the song? Blink-182 has a lot more BPM variables. With Nate, he's always sticking in a very similar tempo to his songs, which means transitioning from one song to another is a lot easier to do smoothly without a lot of jarring to the way that the rhythm flows. The kick drum, the bass, etc. are pretty much in sync between each of Nate's songs. And so that brings us to the third thing, and that is how these songs are engineered. This has to do with both the studio recording differences and the instrumentation choices. But when I say instrumentation choices, I don't mean what instruments are being used. I mean how they are staged within the song specifically. So with Blink-182, they've had different studios they've recorded in, different instruments they've recorded with, different microphones they've used to sing, and it sounds more obvious in their mixes. So there's a lot more tonal variance between Blink-182 songs and NF songs. NF, most of them sound mixed the same way, so the instrumentation's mixed the same. Now I will say this third one, I would give them mostly a tie as far as variation, because the only reason Blink-182 has a lot of variation here has less to do with their artistic creativity and more to do with circumstances. So my conclusion in looking at this is that 2 out of 3 factors that I looked at to differentiate these artists favor Blink-182 as having more creativity. Now just to throw a fourth one in for NF fans, because you guys like lyrics so much, I'd say lyrically both of these groups have an equal amount of repetition, but I'd say that's true of almost every artist ever. There's only so many topics you can cover. But I was definitely looking at the sound of these artists, because that was what I was criticizing about NF, was not his lyrics, but his sound. But what if you listened to this and you said, hey, I'm pretty sure Blink-182 sounded more repetitive than NF. Why do you feel that way? Is it because music is subjective? No, because this part of music is not subjective. We can measure difference between music. You can measure that in a lot of objective ways. The instruments used, the number of notes hit, the tempo changes, cadence is something that has a certain quality of objectivity to it. If you compile a list of all the objective factors you can look at, taking yourself and your own familiarity with the songs out of it. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're familiar with songs, they will sound more different than if you're not familiar. So no matter what happened for me, the Blink-182 songs are gonna sound more different because I'm familiar with the actual songs. Whereas with NF, I've heard all of these songs, but I don't know them so well that they would sound automatically different. And so for someone who's a fan of NF but not Blink-182, the opposite will be true. They'll be able to hear the distinct differences between NF songs a lot more clearly because they're familiar with the original songs, whereas Blink-182 might just sound like a bunch of guitars to them. However, taking myself out of it and taking yourself out of it and simply counting up the musical differences that we can observe based on these clips, which is not a full comprehensive look at the library of these artists' works, but it is a good measuring point. There is distinctly more variation between Blink-182 than there is between NF. However, Blink-182 is still notably very much a specific sound without major changes. So this goes to my point in my original video. I'll let myself say it.
I like when a band sticks to a certain style and doesn't try to deviate too much from it. But Nate seems to be a little bit on the side of that I think goes too far, where instead of feeling like you're sticking to your style while kind of keeping it fresh, it just makes it that every song basically sounds the same unless you pay close attention to the lyrics.
And I did this experiment to see if past Skeem was correct or we would prove him wrong. Based on this, I would say that that was a correct assessment on my part, that NF goes a little too far with how consistent his sound is. And unfortunately, from the discography that I've seen of NF, which to my current knowledge I've listened to every major release he's had, I've never found enough variation to justify more than one album worth of music from NF. And that's about the amount of NF that I can handle. But thanks for all the comments. It did make for a fun experiment. And let me know what you thought of this experiment. Subscribe if you like the content, whether or not you like NF or not. You know, don't take it personal. And we'll see you next time.